My name is Mosab Hassan Yusuf. I grew up in Ramallah as a member of Hamas. I address the words to the Palestinian Authority, which claims to be the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. I ask, where does your legitimacy come from? The Palestinian people did not elect you, and they did not appoint you to represent them. You are self-appointed. Your accountability is not to your own people. This is evidenced by your own total violation for their human rights. In fact, the Palestinian individual and their human development is the least of your concerns. You kidnap Palestinian students from campus and torture them in your jails. You torture your political rivals. The suffering of the Palestinian people is the outcome of your selfish political interest. You are the greatest enemy of the Palestinian people. If Israel did not exist, you would have no one to blame. Take responsibility for the outcome of your own actions. You fan the flames of conflict to maintain your abusive power. Finally, you use this platform to mislead the international community, to mislead the Palestinian society, to believe that Israel is responsible for the problem you create. Thank you.
The UN Charter guarantees equal treatment for all nations. Yet too often, the UN discriminates against Israel. Dictators try to deflect attention by scapegoating the Jewish state.
The Arab group deplores Israeli occupation and colonization.
After the brutal massacres perpetrated by Israeli forces against thousands of Palestinians in an act of ethnic cleansing.
Genocide against the Palestinian people.
Israeli atrocities against the Palestinian people.
Violations committed by Israeli extremists against the places of worship.
The horrible massacres against innocent civilians.
Israel continues to exercise intimidation, assassinations, racial cleansing,
arbitrary detention, the policies of racial discrimination, the destruction of homes, the Judaization of Jerusalem.
UN Watch is the voice of truth. UN Watch brings high-profile speakers to expose double standards.
I have the honour to take the floor today on behalf of United Nations Watch. As we assemble over the past few days, the world has witnessed the unprecedented escalation of the murder and massacre of hundreds of men, women and children in Aleppo. Mr. President, we ask, as the world watches hospitals being deliberately bombed, water cut off for an entire city, why is this Council silent? Is it because this Council has instead focused on condemning a democratic country, Israel, under a special agenda item to which no other country is subject?
When Washington needs advice about the Human Rights Council, they call on UN Watch. The U.S. Congress held 2 hearings this past year featuring UN Watch as the key speaker.
The Council's pathological obsession with demonizing Israelis and denying their human rights has never been worse. Since its creation, the Council has adopted 67 resolutions condemning Israel and only 61 on the rest of the world combined.
UN Watch also appeared in the British and Canadian parliaments.
The Council's pathological obsession with demonizing Israelis.
UN Watch holds key bodies accountable to their mandate. A UN agency that runs schools for Palestinians. UN Watch exposed how UNRWA teachers incite terrorism and anti-Semitism.
One of the worst offenders is UNRWA. This morning, UN Watch published a 130-page expose entitled Poisoning Palestinian Children, a report on UNRWA teachers' incitement to jihadist terrorism and anti-Semitism. One can see Facebook pages of UNRWA teachers celebrating the kidnapping of Israeli teenagers, cheering rockets fired at Israeli civilians, erasing Israel from the map, and posting overtly anti-Semitic videos, caricatures, and statements. I'm here to present a new report by UN Watch, together with our local affiliate, UN Watch Canada, which is entitled Enhanced Due Diligence, an examination of Canada's pledge to stop UNRWA teachers from inciting jihadist terrorism and anti-Semitism. Al-Kastal School in Baalbek region of Lebanon, the entire school held a rally in support of the knife intifada, the outbreak in the past 2 years of stabbings of Israelis in Jerusalem and elsewhere. Teachers who glorify terrorism in Jordan, such as Mahmoud Abu Ful, a student reciting poetry of martyrdom as he wields a knife in school next to grinning students. Also in Jordan, called Nazal School, that glorifies violence and attacks, quote, the stench of Zionism. Manshit Bani Hashim, which celebrates wildfires in Israel.
UN Watch succeeded in placing UNRWA incitement on the world agenda. A force spreading the truth on social media.
I'm here to emphasize the United States is determined to stand up to the UN's anti-Israel bias.
When pro-Iran activists in London marched against Israel, UN Watch stood against hate. UN Watch rallies students on campus.
The United Nations, when it comes to the treatment of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is not only unfair, but is in material breach of its own charter.
UN Watch will continue to silence anti-Israel hate at the UN.
Once upon a time, the Middle East was full of Jews. Algeria had 140,000 Jews. Algeria, where are your Jews? Egypt used to have 75,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Syria, you had tens of thousands of Jews. Where are your Jews? Iraq, you had over 135,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Mr. President, why are we meeting today on an agenda item singling out only one state, the Jewish state, for targeting? Where is the apartheid, Mr. President?
الماضية 104% فقط. هل تعلمون أنه خلال السنوات الماضية قتل نحو 100,000 مسيحي كل سنة؟
The Muslim North has been killing the Christians in the South for over 30 years. 2 million of my people lost their lives. These people have been driven from their villages, but as you can see, these camps are now much better.
Hitler właściwie też planował, który jest też z pochodzenia żydowskiego, też planował właściwie tą całą nagonkę. A kto nagonił na
Czy może coś tracimy poprzez zaangażowanie się w wojnę w Iraku, w Afganistanie, a ostatnio także w Syrii jakieś polskie jednostki się pojawiły?
Na pewno tracimy reputację.
People and the Polish people know.
Bo naród amerykański i naród polski bardzo dobrze wie i zdaje sobie sprawę, że silny sojusz wolnych, niezależnych, suwerennych narodów to najlepsza obrona naszej wolności, zarówno teraz, jak i na zawsze.
This large, magnificent planet. The truth is plain to see. If you want freedom, take pride in your country. If you want democracy, hold on to your sovereignty. And if you want peace, love your nation. Wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots. The future belongs to sovereign and independent nations who protect their citizens, respect their neighbors, and honor the differences that make each country special and unique.
Being drilled. In a way, Poland was just a land of business for many European influences, politicians as well. And it's not the way we want to have a Poland. We want to have a strong, proud Poland. These are not empty words. We want to be a partners. We are very open for the discussion. We want to be within the European Union. We don't want to leave the European Union, and we want to be listened. No one really spoke to us. No one really asked us about anything. Mr. Timmermans didn't ask the Venice Commission. He just go out and gave his opinions, political opinions. As I said, he never mentioned any paragraph. And he's not even elected. And he's trying to tell me about the rule of law. More respect. And think about it. We want to be the part of this family, but respect us.
Versus globalists. It's the political divide of our era. On one side stands those with a fierce devotion and loyalty to their own country, its interests, its people, its borders, and its laws. On the other rests a group obsessed with placing the assumed interests of the entire world above those of individual nations. The sort of people who look at the architecture, art, music, literature, and diverse cultures of Western civilization and think, you know what those places really need? A little enrichment, a la acid attacks, grooming gangs, rape epidemics, Sharia law, and the spectacle of terror. So, who's winning? One glance at the electoral wins in recent history from Europe to North America to South America, and one might say that the nationalists are out front. But in this video, I'm going to make the case that Team Globalist is about to eclipse our victorious battles with a single document which spells the final death blow for every signatory nation in this war. I present to you the United Nations Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, or as I like to call it, the National Suicide Pact. Now, if you haven't already heard of this deal until now, you're likely not alone. There's been a virtual media blackout on the topic in countries like mine up here. First, there is no mention of the term illegal anywhere in the document. Instead, throughout it, illegals, economic migrants, and refugees become conflated classes, all coming together under one group that has a human right to go where they please, when they please, for whatever reason, in the most comfortable way possible. Moreover, migration, for any reason, is something that needs to be promoted, enabled, and protected. The UN's National Suicide Pact, which almost all UN member states, by the way, will sign in Morocco come early December, as I am about the prospect of any nation surviving this suicide pact. Here is the silver lining. A handful of based and red-pilled nations have announced that they will withdraw from this self-slaughter. The US, Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Austria, and Australia are, at the time of taping this video, the 6 sole states out of the 193 UN member states who have said hard pass to this pact. Now, Great White North thinking, dear God, help us, yeah. It's even worse for we Canucks. East and Africa. Canada's paving the way to a more severe, permanent global migration crisis because we're looking out for Turkey, Lebanon, Uganda, and Bangladesh. His words, not mine. That, my friends, is the trouble with the globalist mindset. This pathological altruism and obsession with morality for thee totally neglects morality for you and me, the nation's taxpayers and voters, the senior citizens spending the sunset of their life with a slashed pension owing to the national austerity measures, Joe and Jane's 6-pack, mom and dad to 3, handing over almost half of their paychecks to the government so that they in turn can pay these migrant money pits for doing absolutely nothing besides showing up. The millions of millennials and college students who will never know a job with benefits, and many of whom won't ever likely get the chance to retire because our politicians are too busy looking after men of military age from another continent to pay attention to us. It's clown world. This pact isn't about charity. It's highway robbery of our nation's heritage, our future. This pact isn't about human rights. It's about injecting the radical ideas of unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats into the national legislature of countries who were never asked if we wanted to be invaded in the first place.
Problem polega nie na tym, kto z bandy Tworga rządzi, bo to jest wszystko jedno dla ludzi. To jest wszystko jedno. Chodzi o to, czy wygrywa partia nowoczesna, która chce, żeby ludzie mieli pieniądze, czy partia, która chce, żeby państwo miało pieniądze. I to jest ta różnica.
To ja chciałbym zapytać państwa, miejcie szansę odpowiedzi. Czy czujecie się członkami bandy Czworga, pan Paweł Szefernaker?
To nie może tak przejść. To jest skandal. Panie marszałku, ja na znak protestu będę blokował tę mównicę przez najbliższą godzinę.
Dziękuję panu posłowi. Dziękuję bardzo. Panie pośle. Proszę pana bardzo o opuszczenie mównicy. Bo w ten sposób nie będę mógł dopuścić do zadawania pytań przez innych posłów. Panie pośle, stwierdzam, że uniemożliwia pan zadawanie pytania przez posłów. Przystępujemy do głosowania. Przeciw. Dziękuję. Kto się wstrzymał?
Polish lawmakers voted on Wednesday to water down a Holocaust law that angered the United States and Israel. It's to remove parts that impose jail terms on people who suggest the nation was complicit in Nazi crimes. 388 lawmakers were for and 25 against.
Celem tej ustawy było I jest nadal
The purpose of this law was and still is to fight for the truth about the times of World War II.
czasów II wojny światowej I czasów powojennych. Ale
You know how this truth has been falsified in the last 30 years.
Przecież państwo doskonale
And that's why this act is a kind of shock that was needed.
30 lat, jak bardzo zakłamywana była ta prawda.
Jews from across the continent were sent to be killed at death camps built and operated by Germans in occupied Poland, home to Europe's biggest Jewish community at the time. About 3 million Jews who lived in pre-war Poland were murdered by the Nazis, accounting for about half of all Jews killed in the Holocaust.
Poland's president signed an amendment softening a controversial law that criminalized claims that the country or its people were behind Nazi concentration camps. The original law threatened fines and up to 3 years in prison for anyone who said Poland was complicit in the Holocaust or used terms like Polish death camps. But the law drew criticism from Israel and the US. Now the government has removed the threat of prison time from the law. The fines, however, will stay in place.
Someone who doesn't have money can't financially or stably take care of their own child when they can't even take care of themselves.
Monetary reasons. But I feel like a lot of people aren't in the circumstance financially, or they don't have the support.
I'd say not being financially stable, maybe for being able to taking care of like a child.
You simply can't afford it.
You shouldn't put them in a situation where they can't support the kid.
So the mother would starve to death if she had the child?
No, but her financial situation would be difficult.
Wouldn't the government help out? Isn't there such a thing as welfare?
Along with the baby comes late nights, you know, giving up your life to raise someone.
Isn't that what your mother did for you?
Yeah, she did.
She didn't have you aborted, she raised you. She sacrificed some things so that you could live.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Like, it actually touched my heart, you know?
Żeby bardzo konsekwentnie podkreślać to, że 500+ jest złem, nie dlatego nawet, że nas nie stać, tylko dlatego, że jest to po prostu niemoralne, złe, głupie, że to jest niesprawiedliwe, że to jest postawienie na głowie normalnej gospodarki.
To Paris, France. Can you tell us where you were when you first heard about these attacks and what went through your mind?
I was in Tel Aviv when I heard of these events. I'm talking about both of them, the attack on the newspaper and the attack later on the Jewish supermarket. Deep concern, an awakening call. That's what we're seeing here. This is not some amorphic terror. This is radical Islam terror, who's not only fighting freedom of speech, but first and foremost, the free world. They have a vision to turn the free world into a caliphate. We have to realize that this is what we're facing, dump the political correctness, and start fighting back. In terms of what I expect of the free world, and Europe in particular, is first and foremost to realize what we're facing, not to pretend that it's not Islamic terror. This is Islamic terror. Call it what it is. Because if you don't define it as Islamic terror, but just as some general terror, there's no way you can fight back.
With that could be seen as collectively blaming all Muslims for terror.
No, I'm not blaming all Muslims. Obviously, the overriding majority of Muslims are not supportive of terror, but the majority of terrorists are Muslim. That's a fact. And what we need is to fight back. In Israel, we've been in the midst of this sort of Islamic terror for decades now. We've seen it in Gaza, in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, and all across Israel. And in many cases, the European countries were sort of tolerant to terror as long as it doesn't hit them. And I said back then, whoever accepts the murder of women and children in Israel and calls it occupation instead of what it is, which is terror, will get it in London, Paris, and Madrid. And unfortunately, that's happening. I hope this awakening call will wake up the European continent and start fighting back.
So what you're saying is you think that Europe's been too soft and we're too naive?
I think there's a degree of naivete in Europe. I think there's a desire under the guise of political correctness to sort of understand the motives of these terrorists. We should have zero tolerance to any terror attacks. Zero tolerance. I don't want to understand them. I want to beat them. We need to fight terror and win. We've done it in Israel, and it now needs to happen in Europe.
What do you think is driving this, though, these terror attacks?
It's the motive of these terror attacks is a deep ideology, a deep maniacal, fanatic ideology, where their goal is to form a global caliphate that'll take over the world. You know, there's a mosque in New York called Cordova Mosque. Why is it Cordova? Because that was the west point of the Muslim occupation 1,400 years ago. This is their vision. It's not about quality of life. We're talking about, in this case, French citizens who lived a good life, yet they're led by this radical ideology. We have to fight back, we have to win.
The gunman at the kosher grocery store mentioned the plight of the Palestinians. Do you think this plays any role in these kind of terror attacks?
Absolutely not. There's one motivation, and that's the Sharia law. That's the fanatic Islamic ideology. Trying to understand their grief is not the right approach. When you fight terrorism, there's only one approach: total victory.
Naftali Bennett, thank you very much.
Thank you.